afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commission. Bear with me to get this started here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can.
Wonderful. Okay. This case is Z234-319. It's an application for a specific use permit for the sale of alcoholic beverages in conjunction with a restaurant without drive-in or drive-through service. It's located at the north line of Walnut Hill Lane, west of Marsh Lane. The SUP area is a smaller subset of a larger lot. It's about 10,000 square feet of that lot, Council District 13. The zoning condition on site is CR Community Retail District. It is within that D1 liquor control overlay, which requires this SUP. You can see its location here. Zoomed in a little bit, that red square within the addressed lot of 10051. Taking a look at the zoning map, CR district to the northeast and south. There's PD 31 to the west across an alley that is zoned for duplex uses. Site visit. The site is still currently being constructed and finished up at the time that I did my site visit. And take a look from an access drive looking to the northwest towards the unit. You can sort of see the patio area, the uncovered patio area lurking there in the corner. Taking the same access drive looking to the northeast, back at the unit, and then back to the north of the property unit to the left of this photo. And then photo from the alley just over this wall would be the patio area. Taking a look at the proposed site plan, again, you can see the unit and patio area there, highlighted in red. That would be the SUP boundaries. And with that, staff's recommendation is approval for a 3-year period with eligibility for automatic renewals for additional 3-year periods. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions, Commissioner Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Am I correct that there had been a previous restaurant at this very site that had an SUP for alcoholic beverages?
It's a good question, Commissioner. I'm not too sure. I do know that this site was altered and or removed, leveled by a natural event. I believe it was a tornado. I'm uncertain, though, about the use and the current location of what this unit would be.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident there was a restaurant there that, and that whole area was damaged by the tornado a few years ago. And so it went out of business, but it did have an SUP. And I just brought this up to point out that there's been a history for many years of a restaurant selling alcoholic beverages for on-site consumption.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Yes, Mr. Roberts, I just had a question. The site plan seems to show the entire shopping center. Does that mean the whole shopping center has to be built out with all the parking that's shown on the site plan, even though the request is for just a 10,000 square foot suite?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. So as far as I understand it to be, and I'll let maybe perhaps Ryan weigh in too if he's got an opinion on this, but the area is for the SUP is limited to that what you see in red there, Commissioner. So the context was provided as part of this application, but in terms of vesting those uses or anything of that sort would be reviewed at a separate time of permitting those COs.
Okay. I mean, the SUP proposed conditions say the use and development of the property must comply with the attached site plan. Maybe I'm just overanalyzing this, but it might help to clarify what is and what isn't covered, because I know that Lot 2 says it's not a part, which suggests that the entire rest of it may be a part. Just something that I'm sure we want to have hammered out before council disposes of this.
Yeah, if I could just jump in to speak about that. Yeah, so between, I'm just going to sit down. Between CPC and council, the plan would need to be revised to just show the suite in question as well as the required parking for that suite. The rest of the plan would need to be marked as not a part of the SUP request. That's something that the city attorney is going to have us do anyway, so that will be taken care of.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
The case report says that there's going to be a 5,200 square foot uncovered patio. And it looked from the pictures that there's remodeling going on. Is this patio a new addition or a larger addition to whatever was there before that operated as a restaurant? My concern has to do with the separation between this large outdoor patio and the possible hours of use and the music that could be playing out there, and how much separation and distance and protection the adjoining duplexes have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, for the question. I'm uncertain if that existing space was used as a patio in the previous iteration of the site. It's something that perhaps the applicant would have some more context to. I do know that rather substantive screening wall provided there along the alley that might help mitigate for some of those concerns that you mentioned.
Do you know the distance between the edge of that patio and where the duplex yards would be in feet,
So
approximately?
the alley right away itself is about 20 feet. So we can estimate maybe slightly over based off this plan from where the edge of wall to that alley right away would be. And then from there, bear with me as I zoom back a little bit from the actual property line of those duplexes starting. So, and of course, a little bit of a distance to the building itself of the duplex.
So did you have any concern about the recommendation for auto renewal, considering that we don't have a established track record for the compatibility between a large outdoor patio with no limitations on the hours and the adjacency to residential?
I did not have any immediate concerns with that. The restaurant use is commensurate with the CR district, in my opinion. Felt that the request was suitable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item, commissioners? Okay, let's go to the next case.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Number 7.
There are no updates on this case, but I am here if there are any questions.
This one has been briefed before, correct?
Yes.
Number 7. That was 6. That was 6. We
That was
skipped 5.
6. Now we're in
It's okay.
7.
We skipped 5. This last one was 6, so we'll go back to 5. So now we're on 7. That was briefed before, and no updates? Is that
No
what you said?
updates.
No updates.
Just
Do you
your
have any
questions.
questions on this item? Yes, sir. Please, Commissioner Herbert.
So there was a change, and I think we brought it up at the last hearing. There was a de-restriction of the creek, right? That's already been read into the record and is in
It's part of the docket and all of that, yes.
Gotcha. So we got a list of questions around and comments around our opposition. And since your staff on the case, I just want to get clarity. The first statement is leaving Artesian Creek untouched, preserving its natural beauty. In your review of the creek and how it's structured, where does zoning fit in that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no, good question. Zoning is going to be about land uses that are permitted, heights and widths of buildings that are permitted. It's not going to have good oversight over things like stormwater drainage, environmental protection. It can't be a substitute for those things. Those processes need to occur, and they do occur later in the process as they plat, as they permit, as they submit civil plans to carry forward their project, regardless of their zoning district, whether it's commercial zoning that they have now or a multifamily zoning that they are proposing.
Commissioner Herbert, your mic, yes.
There's they're proposing a retaining wall to make this site work. Where that retaining wall goes on the site will be determined by engineering or denied because of where it's at, or asked to be moved, or whatever the case may be.
Yes, that is true regardless of zoning district.
Okay, so the next thing came up was the buffer. There's an existing buffer between developments currently. We speak about the buffer in your case report. What does that mean? The buffer currently is rugged, so some homes are 40 feet away from, some are 10, right? Were you able to determine a range, or how did you come up with that buffer zone?
Are you talking about the buffer that's proposed in the deed restriction?
Yes.
That was proposed by the applicant. Staff didn't formulate it.
Okay.
But it would, as we read how how it is proposed, it would track along the center line of the creek, and it just prohibits development, which is a broad term, but should be quite encompassing. But we didn't use anything to formulate a width because it was applicant proposed.
Okay, so there was a question about that buffer zone. Do we determine, because I think it says 55 feet from the middle of the creek is what I'm remembering. If we say that they have to maintain that buffer zone, do we have to determine what that buffer zone looks like, or will that be determined at a later stage?
Good question. I'm trying to ascertain how to approach it. They'd have to demonstrate through their permitting process where the center line is and verify that with both permitting and the Dallas Water Utilities as they go through that process. Right now, there's nothing in the document that regulates exactly how that looks, but to me, it's fairly straightforward how it's applicable.
Gotcha. There's also been mention of a trail dedicated by the owners. That trail is not in this zoning case or in the area, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all I have for staff.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Mr. Pepe, we received today, I believe, a good neighbor agreement about this property, but it says in the wording that this is not a legally binding contract, nor is it intended to be. So what value is it?
I have not reviewed the good neighbor agreement, but generally we don't get involved in them because they are not enforced by the city. The city doesn't take party to them, follow through on enforcement because there's not a mechanism for that at the end of the day. So it is some kind of agreement between private parties at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall.
So, Mr. Pepe, our job here today is to strictly consider the zoning request, almost as if we're looking at just a flat aerial view. And does the zoning that the applicant has requested make sense for that area? And there are other departments in the city that would consider the drainage, the stormwater runoff, and so forth.
Yeah, yes, that tracks with how our purview is generally limited to. There's not much we can or should do to influence how engineering is played out at the end of the day. That does require study, and it does require certain submittals to that process when they occur. But yes, we're tasked with looking at land use of one type of land use to the other, because again, generally the regulations that govern engineering, stormwater, creek management, environmental protection are going to be pretty similar between zoning districts, and we also don't know what they will be until they submit their engineering documents through that process. So yes.
So even if we approved the zoning change request, this project might not go through due to some denial by another city department.
Very possible. It happens plenty with other kinds of regulations, other kinds of projects. They still have to meet all of those regulations that are ultimately required by that. And, just the same signing off on this in a zoning sense doesn't absolve them of any of the typical requirements that are required in those processes. So it cuts both ways. We can't alter the process that is required by planning and engineering, but at the same way, nothing we do absolves them of the obligations that they have at that phase.
Thank you, Mr. Pepe.
Thank you. One quick follow-up for me, and my apologies. You know, these cases sometimes tend to run together in my mind, and I think we have had this conversation before, but just for the record this time around, since we're hearing the case now, this body in general, we don't consider engineering issues. We don't have the training, the experience, or the background in general to consider this on a case-by-case basis, and we operate on the understanding that there's a whole back-end process that happens after an application comes through this body that looks at those things with folks that have that kind of training, experience, and education. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'm here as a person, not to say that those processes are perfect, but I'm going to make the statement that we can't substitute a zoning process for those kinds of processes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioners, any other questions on this item? Okay, we'll go to the next one. Thank you, sir. Just FYI, Commissioners, on this case and on the next one, there was a question of the sign, so we'll be considering that first.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Next case is Z234-144. It is an application for an MU3 mixed-use district on property zone plan development district number 69. It's located on the east side of South R.L. Thornton Freeway, south of East Overton Road. It's about 20.9 acres. Here is the location map showing the property in city limits. Here is the aerial map outlining the area of request in blue. You can see a lot of the surrounding uses on this map. Also the zoning map for the area of request in the surrounding area, as well as surrounding land uses. So to the north, we have a multifamily use. A little further north, we have some commercial uses. To the northeast, we have a public or private school use. To the east and south is a single-family subdivision, and then to the west, across the highway, is another multifamily use. So sorry for the wall of text. There have been a lot of updates to this one since docket publication last Friday that I want to go through. So the area of request is currently undeveloped and is currently within PD number 69. This was originally approved by City Council on October 21st, 1974. Under PD 69, uses are pretty limited. They're limited to multiple family uses with a maximum of 740 dwelling units and a daycare center not to exceed 2,500 square feet in floor area. Those are the only uses permitted in the existing PD. The applicant is proposing to develop the site with a mixed-use development. They're therefore proposing to take this property out of PD 69 and rezone it to a standard MU3 mixed-use district. Since the previous hearing, the applicant has volunteered deed restrictions that would restrict or prohibit certain uses, restrict dwelling unit density, restrict maximum structure height, and prohibit vehicular access on Sun Valley Drive. That version of the deed restrictions was published in the docket last Friday. However, this week, since docket publication, the applicant has volunteered a revised set of deed restrictions with changes to permitted uses, setbacks, density, maximum structure height, screening, and vehicular access. Those were circulated a little bit earlier today to the Commission for their consideration. Any of the changes that have been made to the volunteer deed restrictions since the docket, the applicant will need to volunteer at the podium today. I did just want to give a summary of those changes since docket publication. There's been several changes in the permitted uses category. Previously, car wash and office showroom warehouse were permitted with certain conditions. Now they're on the list of prohibited uses. They have also added a stipulation that the maximum floor area for a church is 1,000 square feet. However, I do want to note that this is not legal. We cannot place any kind of land use restrictions on religious land uses. So if this case does move forward, our city attorney would strike that. Also, we've added a stipulation, or the applicant has added a stipulation, that a commercial parking lot or garage is only permitted as an accessory use. Also, that for a motor vehicle fueling station, the applicant has added a stipulation that a gas station with diesel fuel is prohibited. In terms of setbacks, the applicant has volunteered a 100-foot setback along the southern and eastern property lines that would apply to non-residential uses. In terms of density, previously the density restriction was a maximum density of 100 units per acre. However, that is now a maximum number of units of 1,400, subject to the following additional conditions here. If the property is developed at 600 units, a minimum of 5,000 square feet of non-residential uses would be required before a certificate of occupancy could be issued. At 900 units, a combined minimum of 10,000 square feet of non-residential uses must be constructed, 5,000 square feet of which must be retail and personal service uses. In the volunteer deed restrictions that were circulated earlier today, I did want to note that there is an issue with the condition for pedestrian lighting in this paragraph. We would need that to be fleshed out a little bit more. Otherwise, one street light could meet the pedestrian lighting condition. We need more detail there. That's what staff would recommend. And then lastly, at 1,200 units, there must be a combined minimum of 15,000 square feet of non-residential uses. In terms of maximum structure height, height was previously limited to 150 feet. That has been reduced to a maximum of 120 feet. And in terms of screening, the applicant has volunteered an additional condition that a fence or screening wall with a minimum height of 8 feet must be provided with construction of any use, residential or non-residential, within 100 feet of the southern or eastern property lines. And last but not least, an additional vehicular access condition has been volunteered, stipulating that Golden Bear Way or Garza Avenue shall not be extended for vehicular access until a traffic study is conducted. I did want to note from the staff side, this would already be required per code, so this would be sort of a belts and suspenders condition in the deed restrictions. Moving on to site photos. This is on Garza Avenue looking west at sort of the northeast corner of this existing site, which, like I said, is undeveloped. This is on Sun Valley Drive looking northeast. This is kind of along the southern property line of this case. Just some more views from that access point there on Sun Valley Drive. Excuse me. And then surrounding uses. This is back on Garza. Looking southwest, you can see the back of some of those existing single-family homes. More views from that access point, some of that existing single-family residential. That school on the north side of Garza Avenue, or I believe it's now called Golden Bear Way. This is on Sun Valley Drive along the southern property line, looking at some of the single-family homes there. And this is on Overton Road, north of the property. This is looking at the adjacent property to the north that would remain in PD 69. You can see it's developed with a multifamily apartment complex. And then more views on West Overton Road there. These are the development standards under the existing PD 69, as well as the proposed MU3 base district, plus the additional restrictions that would apply under the applicant's volunteer deed restrictions. Forgive me, I did not get a chance to update this section of the presentation with the deed restrictions that were circulated earlier today. But essentially the front yard setback in either case would stay the same. However, there would be urban form setback that would apply under MU3. Pretty massive difference to the side and rear yard setbacks. There would essentially not be side and rear yard setbacks unless the property is adjacent to residential, in which case there would be a 20-foot side and rear yard setback. This would apply along the southern and eastern property line. Again, getting rid of that restriction on a maximum of 740 dwelling units, replacing that with an FAR restriction. And then again, like I said, 100 dwelling units per acre is now expired. It's now a max of 1,400 units for the property. Pretty substantial increase in height. This PD, as it's written today, has one of the most restrictive heights I've seen in my time with the city. This is actually 2 feet less than an RPS height restriction would be. Increasing that substantially under the base MU3 district to 270 feet. Of course, with the volunteer deed restrictions, it would be about 120 feet. Max lot coverage of 60% under PD 69. This would go up to 80% under MU3. Like I said, urban form setback would apply, tower spacing would apply, residential proximity slope would apply. There's a lot of property to the south and the east that would be a site of origination for residential proximity slope. And then, of course, they could receive development bonuses under the Mixed Income Housing Development Bonus Program. However, those would still be restricted by residential proximity slope. And then a pretty significant change to permitted uses as well. With that, staff's recommendation is approval, and by that I do mean an approval of a straight MU3 district, no deed restrictions, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, sir. There are questions. Commissioner Blair.
This PD 69,
Correct.
is one of the oldest PDs we have in the city, correct?
That is correct. There are 68 PDs that are older than this one.
Believe it or not, I was in high school when this PD was written. So in taking this section, and this PD is written out of chapter 51, not 51A, correct?
That's correct.
So taking this section out of this PD gives us the opportunity to upgrade it to this area to Chapter 51A, soon to be 51B, C, and D. Is that not correct?
That's correct. The MU3 district would be under Chapter 51A, not Chapter 51.
So if you were to keep this under Chapter 51, you could not use the MU3, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the mixed-use districts actually weren't added to code when Chapter 51A was adopted. They're more recent than that. So yeah, the mixed-use districts do not exist in Chapter 51.
So the only way that MU3 or the mixed use could be used in the mixed use, in the mixed income housing bonuses could be used as if it's out of 51 and into 51A, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I love the one, the church could only be 1,000 feet, 1,000 square feet. That is, in either chapter 51 or 51A, as you said, and just to reiterate, our code does not give the city the opportunity to deny a church from operating, no matter the size it is, in any zoning district that we have. Is that not correct?
Sort of. That's not a city requirement. That is federal law. We
Oh.
cannot place restrictions on religious land uses under RLUIPA, which is a very fun federal act to say.
So, in my misunderstanding of the law, it's not the city, it's not the state, it's federal. So federally speaking, no church can be denied the opportunity to function in any particular zoning district in any particular size. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Wow, learn something every day. So in these proposed changes, chapter in the MU3, what is the actual height that you can go up to?
Let me go back to that table.
That's page 8 or 9? No, those are your restrictions, yeah.
Yeah, so in a base MU3 district, the max height is 270 feet. The applicant has volunteered a deed restriction that would restrict that down to 120 feet.
And in the standards that we use today, how tall of a building could that be?
120 feet?
150 feet, oh, yeah, it's 120 feet that's being asked to be restricted to?
That's correct.
So approximately how tall of a building could that be?
This is a really rough estimate. I usually think of a story as about 12 feet, so that could be around 10 stories.
And how many really could it be if it was just straight MU3?
270 divided by 12 is,
Okay,
I don't like to do math in public, but I can get my calculator out. 22 and a half, thank you, whoever behind me said that. About 22 stories.
so so this is conceivably being cut in half, correct?
That's correct.
So also where, since RPS will still apply in this straight zone, this kind of straight zoning case, and this location is surrounded with mostly single-family residential, is that correct?
That's correct. To the south and the east.
So to the south and to the east is single-family zoning, so north and west would be the only locations that you could conceivably go higher than the RPS will allow you to go up.
That's correct. And to the north, again, there is a school and another multifamily complex. To the west, immediately, there's a highway. And then on the other side of that highway is multifamily. And while I have the floor, I do want to say that a good way to think about residential proximity slope, because it's a 1-to-3 ratio, for the first 78 feet away from a shared property line, you can't go above 26 feet in height. And then you can increase at a 1-to-3 ratio up to the max height for the district. So the applicant has, volunteered some additional conditions within 100 feet of that shared property line, but for the first 78 feet of that buffer, no buildings could be above 26 feet in height anyway.
And based on the size or the structure of this lot, does that give them much range to go higher than 26 feet on the west and, on the east and?
Not for a considerable distance, yeah.
So restricting it even further, would that just mean that there's a sliver on the back end that could go higher than, which would basically be the same thing anyhow based on the size and the structure of this lot, correct?
That's correct.
So with the standard MU3, how many dwelling units can you have?
There is no maximum dwelling unit density in MU3, so it's kind of hard to predict that. We could instead look at the other development standards that would apply in an MU3 to kind of get a sense of how much they would be restricted. Obviously front, side, and rear setbacks would apply, maximum height would apply, RPS would apply, maximum lot coverage, all those sorts of things. So although there isn't a restriction on dwelling unit density in MU3, all of the other development standards, when put together, still restrict development on the property.
So even though it's further restricted, it's going to be restricted based on the size and the proximity of single-family residence and RPS as to how many units you could actually build on this particular lot. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. Yeah, it's important not to hone in too much on just one development standard that will apply to a piece of property. We need to consider all development standards holistically, as well as the configuration of the lot, access to existing streets, all that kind of stuff.
The last thing, this is facing, I believe, 35, Interstate 35. And this is requiring a reconfiguration of on and off on Overton, is that not correct? Somewhat similar, like some alterations on the access, the service road, is that correct?
Yes, there would be some modifications made to the access road along the highway. And we have someone here who can speak to that if you have more questions.
We were going to get to Dr. Concarly here next, but why not? Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Gus Concarley. I'm the Director of the Department of Transportation and Public Works for the City of Dallas. When I was made aware of this project a few months back, I saw a great opportunity for us to improve the traffic operation in that area. So should this project move forward, that opportunity exists, which we may include the exploring the opportunity to talk to TxDOT and other partnering agencies to improve the ramp arrangements in that area, which will also result in improvements potentially for the Beckley component south of Overton, improvements to the intersection of Beckley at Overton, and basically the overall circulation in that area, especially since recently Overton, we've had a lot of service requests for speeding that is happening in that area, and then we already installed some speed cushions on Overton to help out a little bit with the control of the traffic movement and speeding that is happening, especially near the high school in that area. So by having the opportunity to improve that intersection by 35 and adding that potentially a traffic signal at that location will greatly help also with the safety in that area. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Well, you kind of just took my questions away, but the service road and the interaction of this particular area you have when you come out of South Oak Cliff High School, SOC, and you're trying to get on 35, or you're getting off on 35 and trying to get to the school is where you see a lot of the speeding, correct?
Yes, ma'am. On Overton, it has been, like I said, we received a lot of requests, and then we evaluated it, and we ended up putting in the speed cushions to help out with the control of the speed.
Considering I'm one of those, then you're not my friend, because I'm the one who likes to go real fast. But it's a safety hazard, especially around school. So will there also be some reconfiguration of the lighting structure, the light structure, I mean the traffic light structure?
So currently there is no traffic signal at the Beckley-Overton intersection. So one of the things that could come up and could result from this rearrangement, if you will, is the ability to warrant that traffic signal at that location and putting it in, which will help with the traffic movement in that area.
So when you guys look at the traffic management of this particular area, all of those things will be to come into play when the way it's the traffic is to go on and off, and the flow of traffic in this particular area, and how to clean up the dysfunctional flow. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we will be looking closely at the overall traffic operation in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hurd.
Happy you're here, sir. No, come back. Just a question about planning. You mentioned Beckley being improved south of Overton, but north of Overton is pretty bad as well. Is there any plans to complete Beckley from Keast?
I have to follow up, or you can send generate a service request, and we'll take a look at it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
One last follow-up for you, Dr. Concarley. Just to summarize the questions for Commissioner Blair about the access road and this property, could you give us another 30 seconds explanation here as to what's in the plans, what's in the works?
So again, this is all conceptual. Again, pending if this project moves forward or is approved by this commission. So if it is approved, then certainly we will be working or seize this opportunity to work with the developer and our partnering agencies to overall look at the overall circulation and traffic operation in that area. And I see there is an opportunity for us to kind of make significant improvements there.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Commissioner Hampton, please.
And I think you addressed this, and I just had a hard time following it because it is not really on the ground today. But as much as it's a consideration of South Beckley Avenue that exists just north of the site, we have two access roads, one exiting from the highway, one exiting on two. Well, I'm saying that backwards, but I think you follow. are they intended to connect all the way through down to the south, or are they only connecting this site north to Overton?
So currently, you have a short exit from I-35 going northbound.
Correct.
And it takes you directly into the intersection, or very close to the intersection.
Right.
So you don't have enough storage, you don't have enough
Right.
safety provisions, if you will, for weaving. So what this could trigger is, as part, again, working with with our partnering agencies, is to take that exit and make it the on-ramp onto I-35, and then put the exit further back, which will allow people to exit, slow down, and get before you get to the intersection. And then the other thing that it would do is we will remove all the traffic that will be potentially generated from that site, and get it out of the intersection and onto the freeway, especially those that are going north. So again, great opportunity for improvements to the traffic operation there.
So any improvements south of the site related to the freeway would be limited to how it's thought about for the exiting and potential new entrance at this site area, so not extending down to Ann Arbor?
Correct. I mean, at this
Okay.
point, again, this is more of a detail, this is more of when we get to that engineering design, because you have to look at the grades and all that stuff, and then how we're going to make it work.
Yeah.
But all to say is, from a conceptual standpoint, it will significantly improve the operation there.
Understood. It wasn't appear there was right away, so I wasn't sure what the extents were. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hampton. Commissioner Forsyth, please, sir.
Ryan,
Yes, sir.
in your presentation, you said previously the the density was set at 100 units per acre. What do you mean by previously? Or do you mean by the previous deed restrictions that were offered last Friday that were submitted, or in the original submission?
That's correct. The deed restrictions that were published in the docket last Friday, the density restriction was 100 dwelling units per acre. Now it's a max of 1,400 units.
Right. But to be clear, in the original submission, there was no reference to density, right? It was to be assumed that it was a maximum or unlimited density, because there's no maximum on an MU3, and that was only added in the deed restrictions that were offered last Friday.
That's correct. When the application was originally filed, it was just a request for a straight MU3 district.
And do you know, in the existing PD 69, how many units were allowed in that existing PD 69?
In PD 69, there's a maximum of 740 units allowed across the entire PD, which essentially comprises 2 properties.
Right. The existing Overton Park property, as well as the 20 acres of the Sun Valley Park, which is this development here.
That's correct.
Is that correct? So it's 740 for both properties.
That's correct.
But in the original plans, included the building of multifamily in that southern site, right? The Sun Valley Park, but that phase was never completed.
That's correct. Yeah, the plan, I won't say development plan, it's called a site plan in the PD conditions, although it should be called a development plan. The plan on file for PD 69 today does show that this property was intended to be developed with a low-rise garden-style multifamily product.
The same type of apartments that were in Overton Park.
Correct.
That are in Overton Park.
That's correct.
And how many apartments are in Overton Park?
The plan entitles them for 360 units.
I think that's correct. So basically, the area that was in the Sun Valley Park to the south of Overton Park, which would have been the final phase of Overton Park, that area would have been about 300 units or less.
Yeah, 300, 320, something like that, yeah.
Right. So we're looking at, going from a density of 300 units that were in the original PD to now the developer has offered, as of today, earlier today, they've offered, to have a maximum density of 1,400 units.
That's correct.
Okay. And since Friday, how many different iterations have there been of the deed restrictions?
I've only been privy to 2 versions since last Friday. I do not mean to suggest at all that there were only 2 versions. I received a version from you this morning, and then the version I had distributed to the commission earlier this morning was the result of a conversation with the applicant this morning.
Right. So, altogether, I think there's been at least 3, maybe 4, and then, like you say, there was an ad hoc discussion or an in-person discussion with you this morning, and nothing given to you in writing, just over the phone.
Correct. Yeah, that's kind of endemic to deed restrictions, is the flurry of activity that happens at the very last minute.
And my understanding is that there are still changes to be made with regard to the pedestrian lighting?
I want to choose my words carefully because staff cannot recommend changes to deed restrictions because they are volunteered by the applicant. Staff would, though, recommend that the pedestrian lighting condition mentioned in the deed restrictions volunteered by the applicant be fleshed out a little bit more, so that it requires consistent lighting along the entire length of the pedestrian path that's proposed.
Okay. So that would be another change that we'd like for them to make in the deed restrictions.
The applicant could volunteer
them
that
to
change at the
volunteer,
dais, at the podium today. Yes, sir.
I got off track a little bit, so I want to go back to the question on all the density. Do you know when the request was originally submitted to you, what the estimated density was in terms of residential units? The original plan before the deed restrictions?
No, because all we're considering then is an MU3 district, which doesn't have a maximum dwelling unit density. So when staff is evaluating a general zoning change like this, we're just considering all of the entitlements that could potentially be on the property were the new district, changed on that property. We didn't have any specifics as far as number of units or anything else about a particular plan because we weren't considering that in our review.
Did y'all go to any of the community meetings?
I have not attended any community meetings. I'm actually filling in for Liliana Garza on this because she's on parental leave at the moment. I'm not aware if she went to any community meetings.
Because at one of the community meetings, it was stated that the estimated number of units was about 1,200 to 1,250.
That's a number that I have heard.
So you have heard that number. You can confirm that.
I'm sorry?
You can confirm that that was probably the original number.
I can, yeah, because again, we're just considering the district, not a particular plan.
So we've gone from, 1,200 units originally, then they made this, the deed, incorporating the deed restriction that they would go to the MU2 density, which is 100 units per acre, which equates to 2,000 units. And then with objections, or concerns from the community, they went back to 1,600. And then now they're back to 1,400, but we're still, a couple hundred units over what their original plan was.
That sounds to be correct.
I just wanted to confirm all that. And the final question I had was, help me to understand, in the original PD, there was PD 69, there was to be no access on the southern end from Sun Valley Road into the property, and they've incorporated that into the deed restriction that there would still be no access from Sun Valley Road. But on the Garza, so I think that's consistent. But with Garza, which is also known as Golden Bear, it's Garza is Garza east of Beckley, and then west of Beckley, I'm sorry, west of Marcellus Park. It's Golden Bears, right where this high school is. But it dead ends before the property, right? And in the original PD, the 69, if my understanding is correct, there was to be no access into the community from Garza. Is that right?
The only thing I was aware of as of the deed restrictions published last Friday is that vehicular access was prohibited to the south.
Do you know what the PD 69 called for?
Yeah, so the conditions of PD 69, I believe, don't mention anything about vehicular access to that particular street. I don't believe the plan, where any development in this PD would need to comply with the plan, I don't believe the plan showed any access to that street.
It says in PD 69 under traffic, vehicular access from property to Sun Valley Drive, Garza Avenue, and Huckleberry Circle is prohibited.
Okay, yeah, I'll take your word for it.
So that's reading from the PD 69.
And to answer your question, it sounds like the applicant has volunteered deed restrictions now that would sort of replicate that prohibition on vehicular access that's in the PD today.
So you're saying that they have included now in the, because this was not in the deed restrictions that I've seen.
Yeah, so the deed restrictions published last Friday, and let me pull that up real quick before I tell you the wrong thing.
Well, no, I want the deed restrictions that were offered yesterday. I mean, because it wasn't in last Friday.
Correct, yeah. Let me just pull this up real quick. So these are the revised deed restrictions that were circulated earlier today. Anything highlighted in yellow represents a change from the version published in the docket last Friday. For example, car wash was a permitted use with certain conditions. Now it's on the list of prohibited uses, so that's why that's highlighted. But if we go down to where the access conditions are, I can find them. Yeah, so in the docket published last Friday, there was a condition volunteered that vehicular access on Sun Valley Drive to the south is prohibited. And as of the deed restrictions circulated.
Could you read that, please? This is the version from Friday?
This is the version from Friday, and then text highlighted in yellow is what was amended with the version circulated earlier today.
Because that's not in the version I'm looking at. That's why I'm asking this question.
The version in the docket?
What I'm looking at is a version that I understood. It has the maximum structure height is 120 feet, which is the new version for height. So I presume this is a fairly current version.
This is the current version, yeah. I'm just saying that the text highlighted in yellow is what's changed since the version published in the docket last Friday.
Okay, so you're saying this is what they gave to you verbally? What you typed in?
This is a result of the conversation I had with the applicant this morning and had circulated.
Okay. I think my point is pretty clear. There's a lot of confusion about the deed restrictions. And what we're seeing here is not what I was given. And I think that, we need to continue to hold this case under advisement until, we get it clear on the deed restrictions. Clarity.
If the
We're in the
question
briefing
was,
just now, so we're in just questions for staff. So Commissioner Forsythe, have you concluded your questions, sir? So, Mr. Mulkey, you were going to say something?
I was. If Commissioner Forsythe's last question was about whether or not the applicant has volunteered a condition that vehicular access to Golden Bear Way wouldn't be permitted until a traffic study has been conducted, that has been volunteered by the applicant, and that was in the version I had circulated earlier today.
So that was the part that I thought I understood, and I want to make sure here that what we're looking here at the screen is what we read this morning.
Correct.
Okay. Commissioners, questions for staff? So just to follow up real quickly to Commissioner Blair's questions about the staff recommendation versus what the deed restrictions now cap in terms of height and density. So, is it common for a case like this to begin with a proposal and a staff recommendation, and then it goes through multiple meetings with the public, with the community, and that gets morphed into a set of deed restrictions, which is kind of what we have now?
I want to start my reply with the word unfortunately. That is a very common occurrence.
Right, but what I'm asking is that the staff recommendation in terms of height and density is greater than what these deed restrictions they are now capping.
Correct. Yeah, staff's recommendation is for a straight MU3. The applicant's proposal is now an MU3 with these deed restrictions, which cap height and density.
Height and density, okay. Commissioners, questions for staff on this case? Commissioner Forsythe, please.
One last question. How many other MU3 districts exist in Dallas adjacent to single-family neighborhoods?
That's not a question I could answer off the top of my head, but that's certainly something we could do some research into.
Please, thank you.
Any other questions for staff, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
No, but we haven't briefed this one yet, so we need to go back to this one. All right, do you have number 5? Are you doing number 5, Z 230-4295? We didn't brief that one.
That's me. I can brief it.
Please, if you don't mind.
All right, next is item 5, case C 234-295. The request is an application for an amendment to specific use permit number 2419 for a community service center on property zoned in MF2A multifamily district. It's located on the northwest line of Avenue Q between Laughlin Drive and Ryack Road. It's approximately 43,400 square feet, just shy of 1 acre. Location map showing the property in city limits. Aerial map with the area of request outlined in blue, and zoning map with that same area of request outlined. To the northwest is a credit union, partially in an MF2A district, partially in an NOA district. To the east and to the south within an MF2A district are single-family uses as well as undeveloped property. And to the southwest in PD 290 is surface parking for one of the adjacent credit unions along Ferguson Road. Like I said, the property is currently zoned at MF2A district. A community service center is currently permitted on the property under the existing SUP 2419. This SUP was originally approved on August 11th, 2021 for a 3-year period and was set to expire on August 11th of this year. However, the applicant did file for renewal in time on July 24th of this year, so it is still valid. The applicant proposes to continue use of the site as a community service center. They're requesting a time limit of 5 years with eligibility for automatic renewal for additional 5-year periods. Other than that, the applicant proposes no other changes to the existing conditions or site plan of SUP number 2419. Site photos, this is on site looking at the front of the existing building. Some more photos on site looking down the street. And then surrounding uses, you can see some of those single-family uses in the immediate area. This is the existing site plan for this SUP. Like I said, there are no changes proposed to this site plan. And staff's recommendation is approval for a 5-year period with eligibility for automatic renewal for additional 5-year periods subject to amended conditions, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions, Commissioner Wheeler, please.
Can you give any insight on why did they have to get an SUP since they have been there since, it looks like they have been there since, 1990? What triggered that they had to get an SUP?
It's a community arts center, essentially, and in our code that is classified as a community service center, which is a pretty broadly written use, but that use does require an SUP in the existing zoning district, the MF2A district, so they need an SUP in order to operate.
So I know that, so I'm asking because so why did they need one prior to 2021?
I haven't done too much research into the site. It's possible that they did have a prior SUP that lapsed or expired in some other way. And when they came in 2021, they had to get a new SUP in order to continue operating there.
Okay, were you aware that I spoke to the community at Ferguson Road Initiative who would be okay for them having a longer SUP? They started out in 1966 and they moved to this current location in 1990. And so they believe that they're a great asset. So would you all be against, would staff be against a longer SUP?
Staff would have no objection to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's pretty much all I had. I'm asking Chair to take it off of
Consent.
for that reason alone.
Thank you so much. We'll dispose of this case individually, so that leaves the consent agenda of cases 4 and 6. Yeah, so 3 and 5 have come off consent, 4 and 6. Any other questions on this item, commissioners? Okay, let's go to the next case, which is
Number
number
9.
9. And
Chair,
Vice Chair,
it does not need to be briefed because it's going to be put under advisement until February the 6th, and the applicant's aware of that, as well as Mr. Clinton.
thank you, Commissioner Carpenter, for the heads up. And just for the record, Vice Chair Rubin has a conflict on this item and stepped out of the room and can now step back in. And we'll go to case number 10.
Item 10 is case C234-196. It's an application for an amendment to deed restrictions Z856-107 and Z867-125 on property zoned in IR Industrial Research District. It's located on the east line of Southampton Road, north of West Danieldale Road. It's about 8.82 acres, and the purpose of the request is to allow overnight parking of commercial motor vehicles. This is the location map showing the property in city limits. Aerial map with the area of request outlined in blue, and a zoning map with surrounding uses. To the north and to the east are warehouse uses. To the south is kind of a hodgepodge. It's some undeveloped property, commercial motor vehicle parking, and vehicle display sales and service. And then to the west across Hampton Road is an existing school, as well as some other warehouse and office uses. The area of request is currently developed with the commercial structure and is zoned in IR Industrial Research District with 2 different sets of deed restrictions. Z856-107 applies to about the western 2/3 of the property. Z867-125 applies to the eastern third of the property. The first set of deed restrictions were approved by City Council on May 22nd, 1986. The second was approved a little less than a year later, February 1987. The site currently has a certificate of occupancy for commercial motor vehicle parking. The applicant is requesting permission to park these commercial motor vehicles overnight. And per these 2 sets of deed restrictions, commercial motor vehicles are allowed to park on the property, just not overnight. This is due to the prohibition of open storage in the deed restrictions. So with this request, the applicant is proposing to terminate that prohibition in both sets of deed restrictions. Some site photos. This is on the site, looking at the sign for the property. More photos of the site as it exists today. Again, there's that vacant structure. More site photos. And then this looking across the street at some of the other warehouse uses that exist in the area. And staff's recommendation is approval of an amendment to the deed restrictions Z856-107 and Z867-125 as volunteered by the applicant.
Thank you, sir. Questions, Commissioner Blair?
Thank you for picking this one up, Mr. Mulkey. I really appreciate it. These 2 deed restrictions are a little old, aren't they? And the uses have, the definition and the way we write them has changed from the time these deed restrictions were originally offered up, correct?
That is correct, and I'm staring at our city attorney so I don't say the wrong thing. But there is a clause that we as a city started adding to deed restrictions around the year 2006 that is effectively a severability clause that would allow property owners within a set of deed restrictions to amend those restrictions for just their property without having to get the consent of the other property owners affected by those deed restrictions. Because these two sets were older, they do not have that clause today.
You got ahead of me.
Okay. I'll take your lead.
So just to clarify, these two sets of deed restrictions, this area has multiple property owners, but they are all falling underneath these two sets of deed restrictions, correct?
At least these two, yes. There are several others that kind of overlap in the area, but yes.
And this particular application or applicant is only looking to make changes at their site at 9186 Southampton and not all of the properties associated with the deed restrictions in Tract 1 and Tract 2, correct?
That's correct.
So this applicant is looking to be able to park commercial vehicle trailers or over for longer than 20, or commercial vehicles longer than 24 hours. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it not true that right across the street from there is a charter school?
That is also correct.
And sharing in Hampton is a, what is it, a 6-row? Is it a 6-row or is it 6 row?
6 lane.
6 lane, yes.
Sure.
So it's a major thoroughfare, correct?
That's my understanding.
And that major thoroughfare, yeah, you can trust me.
I'll just nod my head and say yes.
And that major thoroughfare goes straight to, just south goes straight to a different municipality, and traveling north leads you straight to I-20, correct?
Yes.
But the school is, right across from the school is, I'm just trying to help paint a picture, is a charter school who has their athletic field that is actually right on Hampton Road, correct?
That's correct.
So is it not actually accurate that as of yesterday, that the applicant is bringing in new deed restrictions or volunteering new deed restrictions for their particular tract of land?
That's my understanding. However, staff has not received any new deed restrictions just yet from the applicant.
You did.
I don't think I did.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
I sent them yesterday, and they.
Did you send them or did the applicant volunteer them?
No, the applicant sent them to me. I forward them on to staff to forward them on to the planning commissioners with a CC to you and legal.
I did receive an email yesterday from the applicant with a summary of the request. That was circulated to the commission. But if the applicant is volunteering deed restrictions, they need to come from the applicant, not from the commissioner.
Oh, absolutely. I'm aware of that, but I just wanted to make sure that we were talking the same language right here.
Yes, we are on the same page.
So the applicant in this particular request is asking for the prohibition of a deed restriction to be granted, but they are also in the volunteering new deed restrictions. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Carpenter, please.
Mr. Balky, I have a question about commercial motor vehicle parking, because they could legally park these trucks overnight, but they cannot detach the trailers and leave them there. Is that correct? I mean, the cab and the trailer could park as a unit because it's all a commercial motor vehicle parking?
Our understanding, and by that I mean current planning's understanding, is that permitting staff have interpreted the prohibition on open storage to mean that commercial motor vehicles cannot be parked on the site in excess of 24 hours. So that's how the case made its way from permitting staff's interpretation to the zoning case that's before the commission today.
I'll have to think about that, but thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions on this item, Commissioners? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next case, is case number 11.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
The next series of cases are all within the same PD as well as case number 17. Do we want to brief all those together?
I was just asking about that, Commissioner Hampton, and I think if they can work it out, because I think there's two different planners, so I don't know if they have two different PowerPoints, or do you know? Let's
I will
ask.
defer to them if they think they can.
Maybe they can eat.
Well, I'll
maybe.
try to combine my questions for efficiency for
Okay.
the commission.
As
Maybe
their
you,
manager, I can direct Martin and Laquan to speak in unison the entire time they're presenting, if that's something you'd like.
That would, I think, be great.
Okay.
well, maybe, Mr. Bate, you can brief us on the bucket of these that you have, and then, thank you, sir.
I'll also have general comments that might apply to all of them that I'll give before we go through. I mean, we'll have individual photos, which can be viewed if desired and referred to otherwise. Point being is, so we've got 5 cases, all located in PD 134. PD 134 was created in 1980s, roughly, and basically it has a large sub-area called Sub-Area A that to a great degree defaults to R75, except it says that so basically the PD opens up and says the uses permitted in Sub-Area A are limited to single-family detached homes and duplex dwellings. That's A, the first part of the uses section of PD 134. Second part of that says all existing uses, as shown on a land use map, are made legal nonconforming, and they allow basically those uses to remain in accordance with the land use map, which there was a land use map associated with this. You'll sometimes see PDs which encoded existing uses at the time onto a map, and then thereafter sort of allowed them to act something like a small-scale zoning map. And in the case of PD 134, there was a land use map associated with that, drawn in ink for the original PD, and altered before this time. What staff has done is created a digital version of that, basically taken the land use from that, and then digitized it and reviewed it closely. Any cases that could be approved in this PD, we might use that opportunity to update the map as we would any tract map. Most of our PDs have tract maps and things like that that we do update with an individual zoning case. Should any of these cases be approved, we might have the opportunity to update that map to be digital. But point being is these 5 cases have been treated as general zone changes that alter the tract map, or the zoning land use map from single family to duplex on that map. And so without getting too more involved, I'll let them take it away.
All right, thank you, Michael. We're going to go ahead and go through. I'll do my cases first, and Laquan will brief his. Mine will be items 11, 12, and 17. So item 11 is case Z234-228. It is an application to amend the land use map to allow duplex use on property that currently allows a single-family use within Sub-Area A within PD 134, located on the east corner of Ashley and South Henderson Avenue, southeast of Terry Street, approximately 7,500 square feet in size. Located in the Mount Auburn neighborhood, old East Dallas-ish area. Here we see the aerial map showing this site. So it's on the corner lot here with Ash and Henderson. The zoning map, it is all PD 134 Sub-Area A. There's a mix of uses in the surrounding area as you zoom out, but in the immediate vicinity, it is adjacent to some single-family houses and a church across the street. As mentioned, it is zoned PD 134 subarea A, and on that land use map that Michael mentioned, it is designated for single family. The applicant does intend to build a duplex, and in order to accomplish this, they are requesting a redesignation for the duplex land use on the map. Here's an example of the original land use map that was digitized by one of our colleagues in long-range planning. A very heavy lift and effort on his part, and we thank him. Ted, if you're listening, thank you. But the way that it was digitized was to reflect how the current iteration of the land use map exists. It was color-coded into different uses. As you see here, this lighter yellow, as it appears on the screen, lighter yellow indicates a single-family use, and the orange just designates a duplex use. So there are some duplex designated lots within the immediate vicinity of this site. Here's a photo of the subject site on Ash Lane looking southeast, then looking east on Ash Lane, looking to the northeast, looking north, then northwest away from the site of that church. On the corner of Ash and Henderson, looking east at the site, looking west away from the site, looking northeast on Henderson at the site, southeast with the site to the left-hand side of the photo, south away from the site, north towards the site. This is an example of the development standards. The PD references R7.5, and to be clear, that's R7.5 from the original development code, not the pre-amendment code, not the amended code. The PD 134 standards do deviate slightly from R7.5. They only require a 10-foot front yard setback versus a 25-foot. The minimum lot size is 7,250 square feet, and the minimum lot width is 50 feet rather than 55 feet. We also included as a comparison a duplex district, which was what was originally requested. As you can see, a duplex district would have a larger front yard setback, which would actually impose block face continuity onto any blocks it would be rezoned to. They have some changes to the side and rear yard setbacks, and perhaps the biggest change is that they do have larger lot coverage and height. Again, that's for a straight duplex zoning district, not for the duplex use within PD 134. Staff's analysis finds that the area is a mix of single-family and duplex uses. There's proximity to retail on Grand Avenue and schools in the Mount Auburn neighborhood. This site in particular is a corner lot. It's often better suited for some of the considerations that are made for building a duplex, and that the PD 134 standards that will result in a building envelope that is similar to what is allowed with single-family construction. Staff's recommendation is approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bate.
If I may,
Commissioner Hampton?
I'm going to hold my questions because I think it might be helpful to see some of the other sites that I think are going to be about this quick to go through with some of the other photos.
Everyone good with that? Looks like we are.
All right,
continue.
rock and roll through. The next case is item 12, case is Z234-235. Application to amend land use map to allow duplex use on property that currently allows a single-family use, subarea A, PD 134. This one's located on the northwest line of Garland Avenue, northeast of Fairview Avenue, is approximately 7,400 square feet in size. Mount Auburn neighborhood. Here's an aerial map showing the subject site. And then the zoning map showing, again, that it is all within 134 subarea A. This site is adjacent to a church and then a single family directly next to it. There is a duplex to the southeast of there. It is currently designated for single family. The applicant intends to build a duplex, and so they request a redesignation. Once again, the land use map as updated or digitized, I should say, by our department. We see here that the original land use map does designate the church area as public or semi-public space. There's a variety of duplex designated lots on this block and in the surrounding area, as well as a few that were designated as vacant. Here we are on Garland Avenue looking northwest of the subject site, then looking north to the northeast, to the east, to the southeast, to the south, to the southwest, and to the west. And then going a little further closer, looking northwest, there's the subject site in the middle, neighboring house to the left, and a deeper look as well. The development standards, the same thing that I mentioned previously. Staff's analysis, again, we find that in general, this area has a mix of single-family and duplex uses, and that there is proximity to retail and schools, which is generally more supportive of more intense and denser residential building, and that, again, the PD 134 standards do result in a building envelope that is very similar to what's allowable with single-family construction. And staff's recommendation is approval. Third case is Z234, item 17, case Z234-294. Application to amend the land use map to allow duplex use on the property that currently allows a single-family use, subarea A, PD 134. This one is located on the southwest line of South St. Mary Avenue, south of Santa Fe Avenue, is approximately 5,321 square feet in size. It's a little smaller than those other ones. Here we see the aerial map showing the site on St. Mary. And the zoning map showing the surrounding areas. So again, this is mostly PD 134 subarea A, and then to the northwest is a DA duplex district that does have some single-family houses. It is currently zoned PD 134 subarea A. They intend to build a duplex and request the duplex designation. Here, looking at the immediate surrounding areas on the original land use map, majority of the sites are designated for single-family. There are a few that are marked as vacant. They do appear to be developed at this time, but that's just how they are marked in the original land use map. I think it does bear mentioning or repeating that this map perhaps has not been amended in some time. Here we are on South St. Mary Avenue looking southwest at the subject site, then looking south, then to the southeast, to the east, to the northeast, to the north, to the northwest, and to the west. The development standards table that I think we're all getting very familiar with now. Staff's analysis, again, we do find that there's this mix of single family and duplex uses. This particular site, there aren't as many duplex uses in the immediate surrounding area, but if we look at the broader picture, again, we do see a mix here. There's the proximity to the retail and grand and schools as mentioned, and also in this case, proximity to the Santa Fe Trail. And that the PD 134 standards, again, you'll result in an envelope similar to what could be already constructed under the single-family designation. Staff's recommendation is approval. And with that, I'll turn it over to...
Let me hit pause there real quick. Our fire marshal apparently does not allow people to congregate in the back of the room, so if you were standing at the back of the room, we'd ask that you please do take a seat. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Folks in the back, standing in the back, ma'am. I need you, you can, our fire marshal doesn't allow people to congregate in the back of the room, so if you either want to take a seat here, that's great, or you can stand outside. Thank you. All right, is that conclude your briefing on these cases, Mr. Bate?
That concludes my cases, and now my colleague, Mr. Clinton, will brief his. Thanks, you too.
All right, this is item number 13, case Z234-236. It's an application for a duplex district on property zone plan development district number 134, subdistrict 1, sub-area A, located on the northwest side of Garland Avenue between South Mungret Boulevard and South St. Mary Avenue. Purpose of the request is to rezone the property to allow duplex use, approximately 7,400 square feet in total size. Here's our location map. This is the aerial map and our zoning map showing the surrounding uses. So surrounding uses include residential, single family, and PD 134 in every direction to the property. Here's the land use map as Martin went over. This was digitized to be current with the reflecting our current uses. So again, yellow is single family, the orange is duplex. And here are our site visit photos. This is on site looking north. I'm sorry, looking west. This is on site looking southwest. This is on site looking northeast. On site looking south. Brief development standards. I think Mr. Bate already went through that. Quick analysis. So there are existing surrounding residential uses. There are duplexes in the immediate area, actually on the same block as this property. The only difference with this case and the previous three cases, cases are vacant lands or undeveloped land. This case has an existing structure. And staff's recommendation is approval. And this is item number 14, case Z234-238. Similar request, an application for a duplex district on property zone plan development district number 134, subdistrict 1, sub area A. This one is located on the northeast side of Wayne Street between Santa Fe Avenue and Ash Lane. Again, the purpose of the request is to rezone the property to allow duplexes on the property. Same size as the previous case, 7,400 square feet. Here's our location map. This is the aerial map. Surrounding uses include multifamily, duplex, single family, and again, PD 134 with a mix of single family and duplex uses. Here's the existing land use map. Once again, it was digitized to show the current uses. These are the site visit photos. This is on the property looking northeast. This is on property looking southwest. This is on property looking southeast. This is on property looking south. Again, development standards to compare the two, the existing R75A and the proposed duplex. Analysis is pretty much the same. Similar uses in the immediate area. Residential uses, there's a mix of single family, multifamily, and duplex. Once again, this property has an existing structure similar to my previous case, and staff's recommendation is approval.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Bate. Commissioner Hampton.
Thank you. And I'm going to start, and I appreciate Mr. Pepe giving some of the context on the history of the PD. And I know we have Mr. Blades with us as well, so whoever wants to take the questions. But I'd like to start by understanding the PD 134 came about from an area plan that was a staff and community-led review process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as a part of that, there were a number, well, the review area was in fact larger than Mount Auburn, the PD 134. There was an area south of Owenwood that became its own PD. There were other areas that were considered that all had individual recommendations. But for the case before us, PD 134, it was included in this area plan in this study.
Yes, so good afternoon, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Patrick Blades. I'm the Chief Planner for Neighborhood and Community Planning here with Planning and Development. The document that you're referencing, it's actually an analysis and recommendations from 1981, from November of 81. Back in this area, and again, not to go too deep into history, but this area was developed originally with a lot of single-family homes. The initial zoning districts was the dwelling district, which allowed single-family and duplexes. That was updated in the 40s to allow just single-family homes in this area. In 1965, it was rezoned to what was technically called F2, which eventually morphed into the Townhome 3 zoning district. And in 1981, there was a moratorium put in place in this area, and it's not just PD 134, but it's Mount Auburn, they call it Santa Fe, and the Prairie View area, or Parkview areas, to determine the most proper zoning for those areas. So it's not, it looks and it functions like a plan, but it's an analysis to determine the most appropriate zoning for those properties in 1981. And in 1981, it was determined through the city and community effort to say that the most appropriate zoning in PD 134 would be for the duplexes to be duplexes and the existing single-family homes to be single-family homes. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And as you know, I think you touched on that, you know, the area developed in the 1900s, the 1920s, so predated our city zoning. It was serving a number of uses, a number of employment opportunities, including the Ford plant that used to be located in the area. It was constrained by what was the Santa Fe Railroad at the time. It's now the Santa Fe Trail. Eventually, I-30 came in and flanked it on the south side of the current PD. So that was additional displacement, right-of-way purchases, vacant lots that were created out of that, the zoning as you went through. So at the time of this study, 1981, the zoning was predominantly TH3, but that didn't reflect what was on the ground.
That is correct, that there are a number, and the concerns detailed in that study were that a number of new properties that didn't have a structure on them or previously had a structure on them were turning into duplexes, or in fact, people were moving structures, they were moving a duplex onto that property. And that was what the study in 1981. And again, it's taking a look, as you mentioned, a larger area, not just PD 134, but the results of that study said in 134, this was a desire in 1981.
At that time, there was an evaluation both of what was vacant lots, what was, I know there's there's vacant lots, single-family duplex. There's some multifamily, a little bit of office, community serving retail. That was all codified, and that's the various sub-districts that we see today within the PD 134. Is that correct?
Mostly, there are some areas as part of that study that aren't part of 134, but they said we're just going to straight zone them for multifamily or retail, and so they're not part of 134. But yes, there are other areas than just this one particular area of 134 that do have zoning that's different than the single family or the duplex.
And is it correct that and again, the area study became the land use map that we have as a part of PD 134. Minor changes have happened related to a grocery store that's now a school within the area, created a parking lot to support that use. But generally, that land use map from 1981, adopted in 1982, that's the land use map we have today.
Yes, Commissioner, that's essentially correct. That what we codified in 1981 for the allowed land uses is essentially the same as it is today.
And did that study identify what the percentage of, and I'm going to call it duplex and multifamily together just for ease of use, but what that percentage was?
I can pull that up if you give me 1 second.
Well, and if it's fair to say, and again, Santa Fe and Mount Auburn were broken out in 2 neighborhoods. They're all within PD 134. It was 17 and 18%. It was 2% and 3%. So generally about 20%, predominantly duplex, is what were the residential uses, non-single family within the district.
Yes, yeah. In those 3 different neighborhoods, it's 82, 83, 83, 82%. So it's basically, for the residential components, it's basically 80% single family, 20% other types of residential products.
We also have data, just to throw in, we also have the data on the current, land use map that we have, if that's
Based
helpful.
on the digitization, yes, it's about, of the residential uses, it's 16.2% duplex, 83% single family, there's a bit of rounding there. Of all the lots in the PD, it's 14.2% duplex, 73% single family, and that's including your vacant lots, the commercial ones, et cetera.
Well, it might be helpful. I'd asked for that. I'm very excited to know that it's now available because I hadn't received that previously. So happy to drill down into that in a little bit more as well. But I guess one other key point before I close out questions related to the analysis. When the PD was adopted, there's specific language that talks about the number of dwelling units, that the dwelling units may remain, but they may not be increased. It's referenced in a couple of areas. Is it also correct that lots that were identified as vacant were able to be developed as either single family or duplex based on the development standards within the PD?
Could you clarify where you're reading that? Because I've heard about the way you're reading that, and I want to understand where we're coming from on that, because I read your PD says the 2 uses allowed in subdistrict A are single family and duplex. That's point A. And B says, to the contrary, all existing uses as shown on the land use map within this PD are not legal non-conforming uses and structures under this article, with the exception of this 1 lot, which may contain a duplex. No residentially developed lot in the PD may contain more dwelling units than the number indicated on the land use map.
If you continue within that same section, 105D, development standards defined in this section apply to the following uses. 1, all lots in sub-area A that are vacant on January 27, 1982. And then 2, any residential structure in the PD that is to be enlarged as long as the number of dwelling units does not increase. So it specifically defined vacant lots, and then vacant lots send you down to development standards. Development standards state that the following development standards apply to single-family, detached, and duplex, which are what are referenced up in D.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I read that as well. Where the way I read it is the developments, it says apply to vacant lots, but then it's talking about development standards, not uses. And the uses that we're talking about are single family versus duplex. So that's the bottom of the uses section. And so I read that our uses have been laid out for us in the earlier part of 105A and B. But then when we talk about vacant lots, they're talking solely about development standards. Setbacks, lot sizes, things like that, I presume to enforce potentially lot size minimums, things like that, and setback minimums, but maybe not the uses such as single family and duplex, which are defined in 105. That's how staff has assessed it.
Well, I think that may vary, because I will, and happy to have this conversation further. There's certainly a number of our older PDs that exist that have similar language and I will say there is a adjacent PD where I just had a similar conversation with staff and had a different interpretation. So it'd be great to review that in more detail. So I guess it will be an open question then on how the vacant lots would be interpreted, but certainly on the ground today, language per the PD, the understanding would be there's a mix existing today of duplex and multifamily, somewhere in the 18, 20, it sounds like staff has slightly different numbers now. That'd be good to understand why it varies from the plan, but I think we're saying there's an existing mix. Nobody's disputing that. So that leads me to my next question. How did staff evaluate the language within the existing PD that states the number of dwelling units shall not be increased? Because it appears in 3 different areas of the PD, and this recommendation seems to be directly counter to the provisions within the PD.
The way I read that is that it's not necessary. It's a PD. It's not a policy document. It's a regulatory document, and it shall not vary from the amount of units indicated on the land use map. And this is the process of amending the land use map. So if it were to be amended, then they would be in compliance with that regulation. We're reading it as a regulatory text, not a policy text.
Okay, thank you for that. Second question, when staff included a few references to different area plans, including Neighborhood Plus, I think the 360 plan was referenced. Those don't include the Mount Auburn neighborhood, is that correct? And I'll let whoever wants to take that. Both reports mention the text, so.
Could you restate the question? I didn't catch that.
Well, there were 2 area plans that were referenced within the staff reports, one of which was the Downtown Dallas 360 plan that talks about different housing types. The full sentence appears to be referring to different housing types within the central area. But my first question was, is Mount Auburn within the 360 area?
No, it is not. And we do state there that it is outside the boundaries of the 360 area plan.
Okay. And then the Neighborhood Plus plan was also referenced. It references that rezoning should be considered in target areas. Was Mount Auburn one of the target areas within the Neighborhood Plus?
I am not sure. I would have to check the Neighborhood Plus plan. I believe the target areas, that might have been a language that comes from the housing department.
There's actually a map associated with it. I think I may have lost my printed copy, but it's not shown. There is another community within District 2 that was part of the Neighborhood Plus plan. So just wanted to have that clarification. And again, I'll let you all, or Mr. Blake, I know we've all spoken about this together. Was the Mount Auburn community actively engaged in the Forward Dallas 2.0 discussions?
Yes, Commissioner. We had meetings specifically with the Mount Auburn Neighborhood Association, as well as meetings at a public meeting that was basically adjacent to Mount Auburn, in which I believe a number of those individuals did attend.
Is it correct that there's been separate conversations begun with the community to consider what infill housing might be appropriate within the community?
Yes, that in taking a look at the study that was done 43 years ago, before the three of us were alive, it's important to always update those. And so we've had conversations with the community coming out of Forward Dallas to say, we think it's time to take a look at this and see what's applicable, but what we also need to add to it as well.
And that's meant to look at as all the things that we would do within a review, development standards, what is, well, and I guess I'll also phrase this in the context of, is it correct that there's redevelopment happening today within the area, both in single family and duplex uses?
I think members of the community can speak to that more so than I can, but I would just say that there are conditions, market conditions that exist today that did not exist in 1981 that have driven some of the conversation to say we need to be looking at some development standards in the area.
Okay, and so, and none exist in the PD today. So when the PD got adopted, the understanding was it was setting minimal development standards, it was defining the uses, but it was with the understanding that redevelopment and investment was both warranted and was welcomed. I mean, and it's happening.
So going back to the study that was done in 1981, it talks about the need for reinvestment in that community. I believe the way the study referenced it is those were those duplexes and the apartments, but the study does not mention the existing single-family homes with reference to design standards or reinvestment in those single-family homes.
Well, isn't it correct that there's actually a whole, one of the pages talks about an existing structure condition that talks about, housing stock that needs repair, minor repairs, major repairs, and that it was conducted throughout the whole area?
Yeah, so it talks about the conditions of those homes, but it doesn't talk about the design of those homes or the investment in those homes.
I agree. There's no design standards
Yes,
associated with it.
Yeah, the study was focused on trying to ensure investment and maintenance in those structures.
Agreed. And I guess I was trying to highlight that difference. And I think part of what, well, I'll save that for the public hearing portion of the meeting. Final question. The two areas that are part of Mount Auburn, we have the market value analysis that is at the end of all of our case reports that we receive. Could you speak to how that's utilized? And I'm asking this question in the context of displacement, which was another significant part of the conversations that we have had around this horseshoe and in the context of this community. How is market value considered when evaluating these cases, development within the area, development that's ongoing?
I'll be happy to speak to that. What I will say is that I don't think that market value plays an individual or that there's a specific policy direction for market rate housing for different MVAs that is taken by staff because as the Dallas Housing Plan and the Housing 2033 plan say, there needs to be a district or a citywide approach to housing. There needs, definitely are needs in every single district, every single MVA. When we get down to detailed data, we have MVAs from 2018, we have MVAs from 2023, right? So we get to see a bit of momentum of different markets. So for the northern half of Mount Auburn, you'll see that the MVA increased from the two data sets that we have. It remained the same in the southern half, and that the northern half is now in a MVA F, that's above average, and then H is below average. The lower half, the southern half, has stayed the same. The northern half has increased in its MVA. However, MVA is a citywide index. So if you are maintaining your MVA category relative, you're maintaining your pace of affordability with the rest of the city. So for example, if I was an H in 2018 and I was an H in 2023, that doesn't mean it's becoming more affordable, it's declining in value, or becoming a lower market. It means that it's maintaining with the rest of the city. Well, when we look at the city as a whole, we found that affordability has decreased citywide, and market strength has generally increased across the board. So point being, for Mount Auburn South, you saw that MVA maintain. So it tracks with the regular pressure that has been applied across the rest of our city, which is one big market. And then in Mount Auburn North, you've seen increasing pressure as it's moved up to MVA H. So that's a very long way of saying that we have some degree of data for this. We don't have all of the data for it. MVA is based primarily around home sales and an ownership product. I think that you'll see increases in these MVAs, especially, so for example, in the northern part, because of supply considerations, other considerations that will drive up the price relative to the city, which again saw an increase overall. Makes me think about generally the Housing 2033 plan calls for citywide production, identifies again that first and foremost there's a citywide shortage of supply, and then there's more acute shortages in certain MVA categories, certain places that have contributed to those rise in their MVA categories.
So is another way to say that this is part of our city's naturally occurring affordable housing?
Well, as I said, in the northern part, it increased in MVA category, which is another way of saying it's decreased in affordability to the average income earner. What I will say is that naturally occurring affordable housing is at the same rate. Worth realizing is also market rate housing, because it's renting at a market rate, it's selling at a market rate. It may be affordable, but that may have to do with the condition of the property or things like that. So that's still in the consideration of staff.
Okay, and then one final question. I just want to highlight, and I thank Mr. Clinton and Mr. Bate, because I know we've had ongoing conversations for this. So we have 5 cases. We have 2 with houses on them. We have 2 that are currently vacant that had structures on them previously per our analysis, and then we have 1 that is currently vacant. You noted that there was a church use across the street, and this is the one that's on the corner of Henderson and Ash Street, first case that we started with. Are you aware that that was actually a parking lot for the church that's across the street that has now been sold, and that the church and the lot have separate ownership? I think that's shown in our land use, or in our notification area ownership data.
I was not aware of its previous use as a parking lot, no.
Okay, and I guess you're then not aware that it's no longer, the other site is no longer functioning as a church.
I might have noticed that, someone might have told me that, but
okay, thank you. Thank you to my fellow commissioners for letting me get all my questions out of the way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, absolutely, 5 cases. Commissioner Forsyth, followed by Commissioner Houseright.
You indicate there are 3 of the 5 properties that have a house currently on the property, and 2 are vacant, or
other way around. There are 3 that are undeveloped and 2 with structures existing on them.
in the existing structures, are they single-family homes?
Yes.
Okay. And I think it was the 3rd case that Martin referenced, case item number 17. You indicated that the property the lot size on that property was 5,200 square feet? But
Yes, thereabouts.
right. But then when you showed the chart for the minimum lot size for duplex, it says 6,000 square feet. So how does that qualify for a duplex if it's under 6,000 square feet?
Certainly. In terms of the lot size, minimum lot size, the first clarification is that 6,000 square feet was in reference to our general duplex district. In this case, the minimum lot size is actually within PD 134. It's, I believe, 7,200 square feet. However, this gets into a question on the permitting side about legal build sites. Throughout the city of Dallas, there are numerous lots that were either platted before, I'll put it this way, they were either platted before current development standards were put in, or they were, I believe the term is separately owned, so it wasn't platted, but it was separately owned on a deed in an area that was was not, getting my words mixed up. If it was separately owned before 1929, I want to say, if there's some specific date there, then it's considered a legal build site. So at that point, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but at that point, if it's considered a legal build site, then permitting will look at it and say, okay, it's a legal build site in terms of lot size. What else needs to be followed in order to build on here? So in this case, if it were to be built, if it were a legal build site, which we believe it was platted back, I think, in the early 1900s, they would then look at your yard setback requirements, your lot coverage requirements. So minimum lot size is kind of just one factor here in terms of what's buildable. So in this case, if it's a legal build site, permitting then says, okay, you can build on here, but the maximum lot coverage is, I believe, 60%. So 60%, so you can only cover 60% of the lot. You have to have your side yard setbacks, your front yard setbacks, et cetera. So it would result in a smaller product overall, whether it was built as single family or as duplex.
And your code citation for that, just to add additional clarity, is 51A 4.601, creation of a building site.
Thank you.
All good.
Is that one of the vacant lots, by the way? This third case that you handled, number 17, is that one of the vacant lots? Is that a vacant lot?
Yes, that is a vacant lot.
Commissioner Huswright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Hampton helped me out a moment ago by clarifying the percentage of duplex and single family. I was having a hard time hearing, but I think we're somewhere around 20-80. Is that 20%, 80%? Is that what we landed on?
That's useful heuristic. Based on the lots, so when our map was digitized, every single lot gets a designation, and we can do sort of a Excel spreadsheet sum up to get the total number of lots. Based on that, as that was calculated, it was 16.2, 83% for residential, but I'd say 80-20 is a fair back of the napkin, yes.
Well,
and
yeah,
it might be from the
thanks
original
for deciphering this because it's kind of illegible, what's on the record.
It is very small, yes.
So I was curious, here's my real question. How many lots or home sites are we talking about if you add the two categories, the single family and the multifamily? Do we know that? I mean, how many? Several hundred, I guess.
Sorry, because you're asking just the raw number of
Yeah, just the
lots?
raw
Yes.
number of lots that have residences on them.
Of all lots, there's 1,203 residential uses, 998 are single family, 195 are duplex.
Okay, I'm still having a little trouble hearing. So I got 998, and what was the other number?
998 for single family, 195 for duplex, 10 multifamily.
And I will state that this makes the assumption that the original existing land use map is an accurate representation of what's there today or what have you.
Okay, so that's just shy of 1,200 lots. Okay, that's helpful. That's all for now. I'll have more at the hearing.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Is there a tipping point at which staff would stop recommending approval to change the land map from single family to duplex?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Is there a tipping point at which staff would say no to a request for changing the land map from single family to duplex? In other words, could this neighborhood case by case get a staff recommendation to change the land map from single family to duplex? And what justification would be used to either?
I'll jump in on that one.
Okay.
The current planning team considers individual zoning cases, all of which need to be evaluated on their own merit. Outside of considering comprehensive plan goals, area plan goals, et cetera, we don't consider cases as a big batch. I mean, even these 5 cases, they all need to be evaluated on their own individual merit, meaning that, you know, we could have different staff recommendations or CPC recommendations on each of them. So I think that question goes beyond the bounds of what we're considering with each of these individual zoning cases.
Yes, that's totally accurate to how the process is playing out when we reviewed these. We reviewed these as a group for the purposes of, oh, they're a similar mechanism. They are they function similarly. They will need some of the same component reviews. But then we ask each planner to look at each case on its block. Look at the block. Look at the underlying infrastructure. Look at the things that can support one residential use or another. Individually review those things. Recommend approval if you find that they are accurate. They're appropriate for this particular use on this lot. Not all at a time, but one at a time. It just so happened that in this case, each of them was approval. And I would say that that goes to broader, that does relate to broader things, because when we look at one residential use to another, typically we'll look at, is residential compatible with residential next door? Well, I would say yes, but do we have the ability to get the people who live on this site the things that they need to live as well? Can we support these people through infrastructure, through other amenities that they may need, through transportation? Is that here? That was assessed as yes on each of these, but that's generally a process we might look at as we review residential cases in relation to other residential that's nearby them.
To follow up, I know we've had protracted discussions of compatible and incompatible infill over the last few months, and my recollection of where we landed was that it was important in these naturally affordable neighborhoods, that to consider the effect of incompatible density, infill density, without design standards that has the effect of driving displacement and replacement of existing residents. I mean, was there any consideration in these cases given to the need for design standards that would increase the compatibility and reduce the likelihood of displacement?
Well, if you want to talk in regards to design standards, they're held to the exact same standards as the single-family homes that are nearby. That was a benefit of keeping it in the PD. We saw it as one of the ways to carry out the PD intent. These cases will remain in the PD, and because they're not going from R75, for example, to D zoning, they're not changing their development standards. They are maintaining their development standards and are held to the same standard as new single-family. Now, you go to the neighborhood, you will see new duplexes, you will see occasional new single-family. Those are held to the same development standards. Whether they choose to take use of all of those things are another thing, but they are held to the same standard as single-family in terms of development standards. Design standards are not able to be applied in this case. Their process is a general zone change. Things could occur to do that, but again, they are not adding intensity to a neighborhood in terms of development standards, because they're held to the same development standards as the single family that's already entitled underneath.
Vice Chair Rubin.
Yeah, following up on Commissioner Carpenter's question, what can be built there in PD 134 today by right, whether it's duplex or single family, is probably quite a bit larger than the majority of the housing stock in the neighborhood today. Is that fair to say?
Not necessarily. So the max height allowed is 36 feet. So technically, in terms of structure or size, it wouldn't be that much larger than what's existing.
I mean, would you say there are a lot of, the older housing stock is a lot of single family, or single story homes, whereas a lot of the new duplex and single family construction is multi-story?
Yes, if I can jump in, Vice Chair. yes, the existing homes that were built 100 years ago are a much smaller size than the newer structures that are being built, regardless of whether they're single family or duplexes. But the newer structures, and the community can probably provide better testimony than I can 100%, but the newer structures under the current design standards and development standards, you can build a much larger structure than the homes that were built 100 years ago.
Okay. And so I guess there's two sort of ways to think about compatibility. There's compatibility with what can be built by right, and there's also compatibility with what's actually built out today on the ground. If, you know, would it be possible through something like deed restrictions to kind of find a middle ground that if new duplexes come in, they are closer in scale and development style to the long-standing housing in the neighborhood as opposed to what can be built by right if it's maxed out today, either single family or duplex in the duplex lots?
Sure, deed restrictions are one option. However, the better option, in staff's opinion, is to amend the PD to increase design standards.
And that would require an authorized hearing, right?
That's correct.
And authorized hearings are taking roughly 5 or 6 years right now?
Approximately.
Okay. Has there been any discussion, you know, between either of you and any of these applicants about maybe addressing some of these issues through deed restrictions, recognizing that if we could do an authorized hearing, it would probably be better, but there's some time concerns there?
I believe I may have brought up deed restrictions with one applicant at some point, more as just a passing mention of, hey, there may be a discussion from the commission or the commissioner regarding this. They might want to limit things like height or other standards. But the topic more generally, I don't think it's been directly broached with each applicant.
Okay.
But yes, to echo Mr. Clinton's comments, deed restrictions can be used to an extent to put in certain restrictions, certain limitations on development. They are one tool that's available.
Okay. Thank you.
And staff, and just to add on, staff would need direction as to what we're restricting in a district where they're held to the same development standards as a single family in terms of height, width, depth, those kinds of things. We would need to know what we're restricting in that case to make them more restrictive than the single family zoning.
And additionally, as a reminder, deed restrictions have to be volunteered.
Correct.
By the applicants.
Yes. Understand that completely. Well, thanks to both of you.
One quick follow-up. Gentlemen, in terms of building envelope, and this is a follow-up to Vice Chair Rubin's line of questioning, 3 of the 5 lots are empty lots, is that correct?
Yes.
So can you explore a little bit the maximum building envelope there for a single-family home that could be built today on those 3 lots? And can you build a flat roof?
A flat roof is certainly allowed. In terms of, so lot coverage, I'm going to do some quick math here, but on a 7,300 square foot lot with 45% lot coverage, you're looking at about 3,200 square foot maximum house size for a 7,500 square, or sorry, 7,300 square foot lot. Your maximum height is 30 feet. So with a flat roof, that's kind of the trend you see with a lot of new development these days is in order to maximize building envelope, you go with a flat roof. You end up with your full 3,200 square feet of individual floor area per floor. I suppose if you max out the lot coverage, do 2 stories, you're talking about close to 6,000, 6,400 square feet of total floor area across 2 stories.
What was the total square feet?
It would be about 6,000 between 2 floors, but the actual footprint would be about 3,200.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's if you maximize 60% lot coverage on a 7,300 square foot lot.
That's a single-family home. Commissioner Kingston, please.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand this. The maximum height on a single-family home is 30 feet, whereas the maximum height on the duplex is 36 feet?
In this case, with this PD, the way the regulations are written, they are both subject to 30-foot height max.
Okay. And the maximum lot coverage for single-family is 45%, and the maximum lot coverage for duplex is 60%?
No, they're both 45%.
Both 45%, okay. And are you aware that there are a number of new single-family homes that are one-story that have been built in this neighborhood, comparable in size to the original homes?
No, or incomparable in size to the original homes. Not
Correct.
aware of all the development patterns there now.
I'm sorry, you were mumbling. Can you say that again?
Sorry. To directly answer the question, no, I was not aware of any new ones that are similar in size to what has existed there. I will say that generally the ones that stand out are the ones that don't match that size. The ones that do match that size, it's very easy to miss that if you're just driving down the street.
There are. Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Please, Commissioner Hampton.
Just one follow-up, I think, and I appreciate my other commissioners because you asked a lot of the things I realized I didn't ask. But is it also correct that surrounding this PD by right, there's both duplex, multifamily, and again, I know there's some commercial sprinkled in, but this is surrounded where these uses are by right. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it shows up in the land use maps. So thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Commissioner House-Wright.
I said I was done, but I'll just ask staff one question, because you all probably know this, but Google Earth is a really powerful tool to look at history. And I assume you're aware that these 3 vacant lots have been vacant for in the vicinity of 25 to 30 years each, right?
Correct. Per DCAD records, there have been no recorded improvements assessed on those lots since 1999. And I know one lot in particular, the one on South St. Mary, was actually demolished in 1996.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Wheeler, please. She said never mind? Okay, let's go to the next case.
For everyone's benefit, looks like it's item 15.
I just realized I forgot to make this announcement earlier, and it was kind of rolled out slowly. But last Monday was Gianna Bridges' last day with the city. She has moved on to another position, and we'll miss her a great deal. She was awesome and entertaining and very funny and very hardworking. But that's why I'm covering her cases today.
She will be missed.
Okay, next case is item 15, case C234-263. It's an application for a TH3A townhouse district on property zoned a CR Community Retail District. It's located on the southwest line of Seagoville Road, northwest of Warrior Drive. It's about 1.41 acres, and the purpose of the request is to allow single family on the property. Here we see the location map showing the property in city limits, which I believe is incorrect. Sorry about that. Here is the aerial map with the property outlined in blue, as well as the zoning map with surrounding districts and land uses. To the southeast, to the south, and to the southwest are single-family uses under an R5A district. To the northeast under CR is some undeveloped property, and then to the northwest, also under CR, is zoned, is a post office use.
Mr. Mulkey, my understanding is that we briefed this one before, and maybe we're just doing changes.
Oh, sorry about that.
Please.
Yes. Since the here we go. Since the previous hearing, the applicant has volunteered deed restrictions that would prohibit duplex and retirement housing uses, also restrict the maximum number of dwelling units to 20, and require that the connection to Little Fox be gated and only used for emergency vehicle egress from the property. We will skip all that, and staff's recommendation is approval, and by approval, we mean a straight TH3A district, no deed restrictions.
Thank you, sir. Questions? Any questions on this item, commissioners? So, okay, we'll go to the next case. Commissioner Herbert, I don't remember if we briefed this one before. Do we remember? Number 16?
We need to brief it.
We do. Thank you, sir.
We wanted this one briefed?
Sorry, we briefed this previously. We can go into the discussion. We briefed it previously. No need to brief it, yes.
Any updates, changes?
No updates to this one.
Okay. Questions, commissioners, on this one?
Were you aware there was a community meeting last night, sir, to discuss this
I am now.
case? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to 17. We did that one, right? Okay, so we go to 18.
And 18, Z234308, that has also been briefed previously, and we don't have any changes to that one.
Okay, do we have any questions on that item? Commissioner Wheeler, did I see your hand on this one or not? Okay. Okay. I believe that the special sign district will only be briefed per request. No, we're not. You're solid. And just let the record reflect that Commissioner Kingston does have a conflict on that one, but we're not briefing it, so. I think we went through the docket, commissioners. Let's take a 15-minute break and we'll come back to it for the hearing.